The Waldorf Astoria ballroom hummed with power and privilege, champagne flutes clinking against whispered billion-dollar deals. Then, silence fell like a curtain. Eleanor Hayes descended the grand staircase, wrapped in a gown that seemed woven from midnight and starlight. $3 million of handset diamonds and rare emeralds cascaded across midnight silk, catching every light like living constellations against a velvet sky. But it wasn't just the dress that commanded attention. It was the woman wearing it with quiet, unmistakable power. Across the ballroom, Maxwell Harrington's champagne flute froze halfway to his lips. The color drained from his aristocratic face as he recognized his little assistant, the woman he'd mockingly invited to try not to embarrass him in front of the actual players. He pushed through the stunned crowd, his earlier condescension replaced by disbelief. "Eleanor, what the hell?" he hissed, reaching for her arm. She stepped back smoothly, maintaining her distance. From a hidden pocket in the flowing skirt, she produced a crisp envelope. "My resignation, effective immediately," she said, voice clear enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm done making brilliant men look good while they pat me on the head and call it charm. Have you ever been underestimated, dismissed, or treated as invisible despite your brilliance and hard work? What happens when a woman who's been treated as the help for years finally steps into her power and confronts the man who never saw her true worth, and catches the eye of a billionaire who sees her exactly as she is? Hey, my queens, there's a moment in every woman's life when she must decide. Will I continue to make myself smaller to fit into spaces not built for my greatness, or will I claim the room I deserve? Tonight's story speaks to every woman who's ever been patted on the head while men took credit for her work. Every sister who's been called adorable when she was being brilliant. Every daughter who watched her mother compromise her dreams for men who never appreciated her sacrifice. Some of us spend years playing by rules designed to keep us in supporting roles. We wait for permission that never comes. We accept crumbs of recognition and crumbs of love when we deserve the whole feast. But my beautiful sisters, what Eleanor Hayes discovered, what I pray you'll discover too, is that your worth isn't determined by those who undervalue you. The moment you invest in yourself with the same fierce commitment you've given to others is the moment everything changes, in your career and in your heart. Because when you finally stand in your full power, you attract not just success, but love that sees and celebrates your magnificence. Maxwell's laugh was uneasy, still laced with that condescending tone even as his eyes darted around, aware of the witnesses to his humiliation. "Come on, Ellie. This is a bit dramatic, don't you think? The gala's for serious players. You're not actually going to walk away from everything we've built together over a joke, are you?" "A joke?" Eleanor smiled, sharp and radiant. "The joke was believing I needed your invitation or your approval to belong in rooms like this. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I hear the real power conversations are about to start." She turned away, leaving Maxwell standing speechless with the resignation letter in his hand. The crowd parted for her naturally, drawn by both the spectacular gown and the palpable aura of transformation she carried. Eleanor moved through the ballroom with unhurried confidence, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, nodding graciously at the admiring glances and curious whispers. "Who is she?" "That's Vos Couture. Nobody else gets that level of detail. $3 million minimum." Vivian Shaw, Eleanor's closest friend from business school, resplendent in a deep crimson gown, intercepted her with a broad smile and whispered, "My God, Elle, you actually did it. The dress is even more spectacular than you described." "Worth every penny," Eleanor replied softly. "Did you see his face?" "I think half of Manhattan saw his face. But more importantly," Vivian nodded subtly toward the far corner of the ballroom, "Alexander Sinclair is here, and he hasn't taken his eyes off you since you came down those stairs." Eleanor followed her friend's gaze to where a tall, distinguished man stood slightly apart from the main crowd. At 44, Alex Sinclair was the antithesis of Maxwell Harrington, a self-made tech genius whose pivot to ethical real estate development had made him both a billionaire and a respected voice for community-centered growth. His warm brown eyes met hers across the room, and he raised his glass in a small salute of appreciation. "He's heading this way," Vivian murmured. "And on that note, I'll make myself scarce. Call me tomorrow with all the details." Eleanor had just enough time to compose herself before Alexander Sinclair stood before her, his presence commanding but not overwhelming. Unlike Maxwell's practiced charm, there was something genuine in his direct gaze and the slight hesitation before he spoke. "That gown is extraordinary," he said, his voice respectful. "But it's the woman wearing it who stopped the room. I'm Alex Sinclair." "Eleanor Hayes," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I believe I'm supposed to be writing a very large check to Harrington Global tonight," he continued with a hint of amusement. "Though I just witnessed what appeared to be a rather dramatic resignation. Should I be reconsidering my investment?" Eleanor smiled. "I would never presume to advise someone of your business acumen, Mr. Sinclair. But I will say that any company that fails to recognize the value of all its talent might have similar blind spots in other areas." "A diplomatic answer," he acknowledged with appreciation. "And please call me Alex. I have a strong aversion to formality where it isn't warranted." "Then Eleanor, please." "I understand you were Maxwell Harrington's executive assistant," Alex said, his tone conversational rather than judgmental. "With skills that impressive, why stay in that role for 3 years?" "Strategic patience," Eleanor replied honestly, "and the opportunity to learn how power truly operates in rooms like this one." She gestured subtly to the networking happening around them. "Some lessons can only be learned from the inside." "And now, what does strategic patience suggest for your next move?" Eleanor took a sip of champagne, considering her answer. "I've been building my own investment portfolio for years. Now seems like the right time to step out of the shadows and establish my own boutique advisory firm. Hayes Strategic Capital has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Alex's eyes widened slightly with genuine interest. "Very nice indeed, and perfectly timed, with the market shifts we're seeing in sustainable development." They moved from the crowded ballroom to a quieter terrace overlooking the city lights. Alex listened when she spoke of market inefficiencies and untapped opportunities. He asked questions about her investment strategy without a hint of condescension. And when she explained her vision for ethical capital deployment, he engaged with her ideas as an equal rather than humoring a little assistant with adorable ambitions. "That dress," Alex said finally, during a pause in their conversation about mixed-use development trends. "It's an Elena Voss original, isn't it?" Eleanor nodded. "You have a good eye. My sister is a fashion editor," he explained. "Elena's work is unmistakable. That level of craftsmanship is, well, not to be indelicate, but it represents a significant investment." $3 million, Eleanor said matter-of-factly, watching his reaction carefully. "Every penny of it mine. Earned through investments made with overlooked bonuses and midnight strategy sessions, while the men who underestimated me slept soundly in their inherited security." Instead of shock or disbelief, Alex's face showed something rarer: respect. "That's not just a dress," he said quietly. "It's a declaration." "Exactly," Eleanor said, surprised by his understanding. The admission hung between them, creating a strange intimacy. Eleanor felt herself drawn back to the moment when the plan had first crystallized in her mind. The seed of tonight's triumph planted in soil rich with years of dismissal and determination. 3 months earlier, Eleanor smoothed her pencil skirt and checked her reflection in the polished elevator doors of the Harrington Global headquarters. 7 years of hard work had built her reputation as the most efficient executive assistant on Wall Street, but at what cost? The gleaming metal surface reflected back a woman who looked composed and professional, yet Eleanor could see the subtle signs of fatigue around her hazel eyes. "Going up!" The deep voice startled her from her thoughts. Eleanor turned to find Maxwell Harrington himself standing there, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. At 51, he cut an impressive figure, silver hair perfectly styled, aristocratic features set in their usual expression of casual superiority, the confidence of old money and inherited power in every movement. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," Eleanor replied, stepping into the elevator beside her boss. She maintained the professional distance that had defined their relationship for 3 years, despite the countless late nights, crisis interventions, and multimillion-dollar deals she'd orchestrated from the shadows. "Ellie," he acknowledged with that patronizing smile she'd come to recognize, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Ready for the quarterly meeting? I need you sharp today." "Of course, sir. I've prepared the updated projections for the Singapore acquisition and compiled the risk assessment reports you requested." Maxwell barely glanced at the leather portfolio she offered. "Just have them ready when I call for them. And make sure there's fresh coffee. The Brazilian blend. Not that dreadful stuff from last week." The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, and Maxwell strode out without waiting for her response. Eleanor took a deep breath before following. This was the rhythm of their relationship. His demands, her competence, his dismissal of that competence as simply doing what was expected. What Maxwell Harrington didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Eleanor Hayes wasn't just another executive assistant with stars in her eyes. Beneath her carefully cultivated professional demeanor was a Wharton MBA she rarely mentioned, a strategic mind that had quietly built her own 7-figure investment portfolio from the scraps of recognition and overlooked bonuses, and a woman who was growing increasingly tired of shrinking herself to fit into the expectations of men who saw her competence as cute rather than commanding. The executive boardroom buzzed with the energy of power and privilege. The all-male C-suite of Harrington Global lounged in buttery leather chairs, trading jokes about their latest acquisitions, both corporate and personal. Eleanor moved efficiently around the periphery, setting up the presentation materials, ensuring the coffee service was perfect, invisible yet essential. "Gentlemen," Maxwell called the meeting to order, leaning back in his chair at the head of the table. "Before we dive into the quarterly numbers, a little social business." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced an elegant envelope sealed with actual wax, the kind of old money touch that Maxwell reveled in. "The Manhattan Philanthropy Gala is next month. The usual suspects will be there, the Sinclairs, the Vanderwells, the entire board of Atlantic Capital." Eleanor continued arranging documents, her face betraying nothing as she listened. The Manhattan Philanthropy Gala was legendary, not just for the millions raised for various causes, but as the ultimate insider networking event where real business happened behind champagne flutes and beneath crystal chandeliers. "I've secured invitations for the executive team," Maxwell continued, passing the gilded cards around the table. "James, make sure you bring Diana. The Rockefellers adored her last year. Richard, perhaps leave Kimberly at home. Her political opinions are a bit enthusiastic for this crowd." The men chuckled, comfortable in their casual sexism, discussing their wives and girlfriends as accessories to be strategically deployed or conveniently forgotten. Maxwell held up one final invitation, twirling it between his fingers. "I have one extra," he mused, his gaze falling on Eleanor. "Ellie, darling," he said with a patronizing chuckle, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "you really should come. It'll be adorable watching my little assistant try to navigate real society. Wear something appropriate. Just don't embarrass me in front of the actual players." The room erupted in condescending laughter. James Whitfield, the silver-haired VP of operations, smirked across his coffee cup. "Yeah, Ellie, try not to spill champagne on a Rockefeller. These galas aren't for the help, sweetheart," added Richard Pearson, leaning back in his chair. "It's where real power happens. Stick close to Maxwell. He can introduce you to some nice young executives who might be looking for a competent assistant of their own." Eleanor felt the familiar heat of humiliation rise in her chest, but her expression remained impassive. 3 years of practice had perfected her ability to weather these moments without revealing the rage and determination that fueled her after-hours investment strategies and meticulous planning. She met Maxwell's gaze directly, her hazel eyes cool and unflinching. "I'll be there, Mr. Harrington. You can count on it." The invitation was tossed carelessly onto the conference table as Maxwell turned his attention to the quarterly figures. "Now let's see those Singapore numbers, Ellie. Try to keep up with the real conversation." Eleanor retrieved her tablet and began the presentation she had prepared, her voice steady and professional despite the simmer of resolve crystallizing into decision. She said nothing more about the gala. She didn't mention the private fittings with Elena Voss that had begun 6 months ago, when she'd first heard rumors of this year's guest list. She didn't reveal that she had already spent $3 million of her own hard-earned money on a gown designed exclusively for her, a gown that had required her to liquidate a portion of her carefully built portfolio. And she certainly didn't tell Maxwell Harrington that she had already typed her resignation letter and scheduled it to email at 9 p.m. sharp the night of the gala. For now, she simply highlighted the projected 8% growth in the Asian markets and passed out the reports she had meticulously prepared, invisible as always to the men who thought they ran the world. Back to the present. Alex's voice pulled Eleanor from her memory. "You're thinking about how you got here, aren't you?" Eleanor was surprised by his perception. "How did you know?" "There was a moment just now when you looked at Harrington across the room with such clarity, like you were seeing the full journey that brought you to this moment." Alex smiled. "I recognized that look. I felt it myself." "And what brought you here tonight?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious about the man whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by his reputation for reclusiveness. "I thought you avoided these gatherings." "Usually I do," Alex admitted. "But sometimes you need to step into rooms where decisions are made, even if they're not your preferred environment. I'm launching a community development initiative that needs political support." "The Harlem Renaissance Project?" Eleanor asked. "I've read about it. Affordable housing combined with small business incubators and educational facilities." Alex looked surprised. "You've done your homework. I make it my business to know which way the winds are shifting in ethical investment," Eleanor replied. "Your approach is refreshing in a landscape that usually sacrifices community for profit." "That's precisely what I'm trying to change," Alex said, an intensity coming into his voice that hadn't been there before. "The idea that profit and community well-being are opposing forces is outdated and destructive." As they continued talking, Eleanor found herself drawn to his vision, his intelligence, and most surprisingly, the way he treated her as an intellectual equal without question or hesitation. There was a magnetic quality to his authenticity that stood in stark contrast to the practiced charm of men like Maxwell. Across the ballroom, Maxwell watched their interaction with increasing agitation. Eleanor could see him calculating his next move, trying to salvage both his wounded pride and the potential investment from Sinclair that he'd been pursuing for months. "I should warn you," Eleanor said with a small smile. "Maxwell is likely to interrupt us soon. He's been courting your investment for the Singapore expansion, and watching us talk is probably causing him physical pain." Alex laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Let him come. I'm far more interested in continuing our conversation than hearing his pitch." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "In fact, I'd like to continue this conversation beyond tonight, perhaps dinner next week, to discuss potential synergies between your new venture and my community development work." The invitation hung between them, ostensibly professional but with an undercurrent that Eleanor couldn't quite name. Respect certainly, but perhaps something more. Before she could respond, Maxwell materialized beside them, his smile brittle with forced confidence. "Alex, I see you've met my executive assistant. Eleanor is quite good at organizing files and making coffee, but I hope she hasn't been boring you with business talk that's a bit beyond her scope." Maxwell placed a proprietary hand on Eleanor's shoulder, which she smoothly stepped away from. "Former executive assistant," Eleanor corrected calmly. "As of about 20 minutes ago." "A temporary emotional reaction," Maxwell said dismissively to Alex. "Women, you know. She'll be back at her desk on Monday." Alex's expression cooled noticeably. "Actually, Mr. Harrington," Alex said, his voice measured but firm, "Ms. Hayes and I were discussing her vision for Hayes Strategic Capital, which sounds remarkably aligned with the direction I'm taking my community development initiatives. Far from being beyond her scope, I'd say her understanding of ethical investment strategies is among the most insightful I've heard in quite some time." Maxwell's face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion, then disbelief, then a desperate attempt to recover. "Ah, well, Eleanor has always been ambitious. I've mentored her, of course, nurtured that potential. In fact, I've been encouraging her to take on more responsibility within Harrington Global." "How generous of you," Eleanor said, not bothering to hide the irony in her voice, "especially considering you just told the entire board that the help shouldn't embarrass you in front of the actual players." Alex raised an eyebrow at Maxwell, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Well, clearly a misunderstanding. Ellie knows I value her contributions. This resignation is unnecessary. We can discuss a promotion, perhaps a title change." "My decision is final, Mr. Harrington," Eleanor interrupted, her voice gentle but resolute. "But I appreciate your sudden recognition of my worth now that it serves your interests." Maxwell's charming facade cracked just slightly, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You've been planning this, haven't you? Using company time to build your little portfolio? That could be construed as a breach of contract, perhaps even misappropriation of resources." "I've documented every minute of my time for 3 years," Eleanor replied calmly. "Every late night, every weekend, every vacation day spent covering for your mistakes or propping up your reputation. If you'd like to discuss breaches of contract, I'm more than prepared for that conversation. Perhaps with the SEC as a third party, given some of the regulatory corners you've cut on the Singapore deal." The color drained from Maxwell's face. Not a direct threat. Eleanor was too sophisticated for that, but a reminder that she knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak. Alex cleared his throat. "If you'll excuse us, Mr. Harrington, Ms. Hayes and I were in the middle of a promising business discussion." Maxwell retreated, throwing one last wounded look at Eleanor that was equal parts bewilderment and fury. As he disappeared into the crowd, Eleanor felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying for 3 years. "That was impressive," Alex said softly. "Both the exit and the restraint." "I've had a long time to prepare," Eleanor admitted. "Though I'll confess, the reality is more satisfying than the rehearsals." Alex laughed. "I imagine so. Now, about that dinner. To discuss business synergies?" Eleanor clarified, a small smile playing at her lips. "If you like," Alex said, his eyes warm. "Or we could just call it dinner between two people who appear to share values, interests, and a healthy disregard for outdated power structures. No agenda required." Eleanor considered him for a moment. Throughout her career, she'd been careful to keep professional boundaries firm, especially with men who might perceive personal interest as an invitation to disregard her competence. But something about Alex Sinclair felt different. The way he had engaged with her ideas first, the respect that preceded any hint of personal attraction. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Though I should warn you, I'm about to be very busy launching a new firm." "I wouldn't expect anything less," he replied with a smile that reached his eyes. "I admire ambition, Eleanor. I always have." Their conversation was interrupted by the orchestra beginning a new piece, a signal that the formal dinner portion of the evening was about to begin. Eleanor glanced at the time, 8:55 p.m. In 5 minutes, her resignation email would automatically send to the entire board and executive team, making her departure official and irrevocable. "Shall we?" Alex offered his arm, gesturing toward the grand dining room. As they moved through the crowd, heads turned to follow Eleanor's progress, whispers trailing in her wake. For once, she didn't mind being noticed. Tonight, on her terms, in armor crafted from her own overlooked brilliance, she had finally claimed the visibility she'd earned. Alex leaned closer and murmured, "You've caused quite a stir. Half the room is trying to figure out who you are, and the other half is pretending they've known all along." Eleanor smiled. "The funny thing is, I've been at most of these events for years, just standing behind Maxwell with a tablet, invisible to everyone who mattered." "Their loss," Alex said simply. As they reached the dining room, Eleanor spotted Vivian waving discreetly from a table near the windows. "My friend saved us seats," she said. "Would you like to join us?" "I'd be honored," Alex replied. They made their way through the elegantly dressed crowd, stopping occasionally as various power players suddenly recognized the need to introduce themselves to Eleanor. the same people who had looked through her for years. She handled each interaction with gracious brevity, neither rude nor particularly encouraging. As they settled at the table, Eleanor's phone vibrated with an incoming email notification. She knew without looking that her resignation had just been delivered to the Harrington Global Board. There was no going back now, not that she'd had any intention to. Vivian raised her glass in a subtle toast. To new beginnings. And to knowing your worth, Alex added, his eyes on Eleanor. The plates before them gleamed with extravagance. Tiny portions of rare delicacies arranged like jewels on hand-painted china. Eleanor thought of all the corporate dinners she'd helped plan but never attended. All the times she'd ordered Maxwell's favorite dishes while eating takeout at her desk. The symmetry of the moment, sitting at the table rather than setting it, wasn't lost on her. As conversation flowed around her, Eleanor found her thoughts drifting to the path that had led her here. Not just to this moment of triumph, but to the years of careful preparation that had made it possible. Eleanor Hayes had grown up watching her mother make herself small for men who never deserved her brilliance. Patricia Hayes had been a gifted mathematician with dreams of academia, but she'd set them aside for Eleanor's father, a charming, ambitious investment banker who had promised Patricia the world and delivered nothing but disappointment. Never hitch your star to a man who sees your light as something to be absorbed rather than admired. Patricia had told Eleanor on the day her father finally left them for his 24-year-old assistant. Eleanor had been 16, old enough to understand the bitter irony of her mother's sacrifices. Patricia had rebuilt their lives with quiet determination, returning to school for her long-delayed PhD, while working as a high school math teacher to support them. Eleanor had watched her mother's transformation from diminished wife to respected educator with a fierce pride that shaped her own ambitions. Choose yourself first, Patricia advised when Eleanor was accepted to Wharton. Build something that can't be taken from you. Love will come, but never at the expense of your power. Eleanor had taken that lesson to heart, excelling at Wharton and carefully planning her entry into the world of high finance. When the opportunity at Harrington Global had arisen, she'd seen it not as a stepping stone but as a strategic position, a chance to learn the inner workings of power from behind the scenes, to observe the machinery without being noticed by those who operated it. The plan had always been 3 to 5 years, enough time to build connections, understand the unwritten rules, and most importantly, to create her own financial foundation through careful investments. What Eleanor hadn't anticipated was how soul-grinding it would be to make herself invisible, to swallow her intelligence and ambition day after day while men like Maxwell Harrington took credit for her work. Your performance review is excellent, Ellie, Maxwell had told her after her first year, patting her hand in that patronizing way that made her skin crawl. You're like a good watch, reliable, unobtrusive, always there when I need you. That's rare in a woman with your educational background. Most Wharton girls want to run the show before they've earned it. Eleanor had smiled and thanked him, then gone home and transferred her bonus into her private investment account, the first of many such transactions that would eventually fund her escape and her revenge. The sound of crystal clinking against silver pulled Eleanor back to the present. The Gala's chairman was making the traditional call for attention, preparing to announce the evening's fundraising total. Across the room, Maxwell Harrington stood with a group of board members, his expression thunderous as he stared at his phone, clearly having just received her formal resignation email. Everything all right? Alex asked quietly, noticing her attention shift. Perfect, Eleanor replied, turning back to him with a genuine smile. Just watching the last piece fall into place. After the chairman's speech and the obligatory applause for the record-breaking donations, the formal part of the evening began to wind down. Guests moved back to the ballroom for dancing and more intimate networking, the real business of the evening continuing over brandy and desserts. Alex leaned close to Eleanor. Would you care to dance? Or would you prefer to continue our conversation somewhere quieter? Both have their appeal, she admitted. But perhaps we could start with a dance and see where the evening takes us? He smiled and offered his hand. As they moved to the dance floor, Eleanor was acutely aware of the eyes following them. Curious, envious, calculating. Alexander Sinclair rarely participated in these social rituals, and his evident interest in the woman who had just publicly resigned from Harrington Global was creating the kind of buzz that would last for weeks in certain circles. "You realize we're creating quite the narrative," she said as his hand settled respectfully at her waist. "Let them talk," Alex replied, guiding her smoothly into the dance. "I've never much cared for other people's narratives about my life. And yet you understand the power of perception," Eleanor observed. "Your reputation is carefully cultivated, the brilliant recluse who builds sustainable communities rather than just profit margins. The tech visionary with a conscience. Is that how you see me?" He seemed genuinely curious. "It's how you present yourself," Eleanor replied honestly. "The truth of a person is usually more complex than their public persona. Just as you're more than the efficient assistant who suddenly transformed into a vision in $3 million worth of diamonds and emeralds." Eleanor laughed softly. "Touché." As they moved together to the music, Eleanor found herself surprisingly comfortable in Alex's arms. He was an assured dancer, leading without dominating, creating space for her to follow or add her own flourishes. It struck her as a telling metaphor. "You're thinking again," he observed, his voice low. "Just noticing patterns," she replied. "In dance and in life." Before he could respond, a tap on his shoulder interrupted them. Maxwell Harrington stood there, his composure restored but a dangerous edge to his smile. "May I cut in?" he asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. Alex looked to Eleanor, leaving the decision entirely to her. "That depends on Ms. Hayes," he said simply. Eleanor considered refusing but decided against it. Better to face this confrontation head-on than to have it hanging over her for the rest of the evening. "One dance, Mr. Harrington." Alex stepped back with a slight bow, his eyes conveying a silent message. "I'll be right here." Maxwell took his place, his grip on Eleanor's waist noticeably tighter than necessary. "That was quite a performance, Ellie," he said as they began to move. "I didn't realize you harbored such theatrical ambitions." "Not theater," Eleanor corrected calmly. "Strategy. Is that what you call betrayal these days?" His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "After everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done?" Eleanor echoed, keeping her own voice equally quiet despite the surge of indignation. "What exactly have you done for me, Mr. Harrington? Taken credit for my work? Dismissed my ideas? Treated me as an extension of your office equipment? I gave you opportunities. You gave me tasks," she interrupted smoothly. "I turned them into opportunities. There's a difference." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "And now you're what? Going to start your own firm? With what clients? What connections? Do you think anyone in this room will take you seriously without my name behind you?" Eleanor smiled, genuinely amused by his blindness. "I've been building my own network for 3 years, Maxwell. The same 3 years I've been managing your relationships, ghostwriting your correspondence, and representing you in meetings you were too busy to attend. Your clients know me. Many of them trust me more than they trust you." The color drained from his face again. "You wouldn't dare." "I'm not going to poach your clients," Eleanor assured him. "I don't need to. I have my own prospects, my own strategy, and frankly, my own ethical standards that differ quite significantly from yours." "You signed a non-compete," he reminded her, his voice hardening. "Which only applies to direct competitors in your specific market segment," she replied smoothly. "Hayes Strategic Capital will focus on ethical investment and community development. Hardly your area of expertise or interest." The music was beginning to wind down, and Eleanor could see the calculation in Maxwell's eyes. One last attempt to reassert control. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "When the novelty wears off and Sinclair loses interest in his latest charity case, you'll find yourself very alone in a world that doesn't take kindly to women who don't play by the rules." The barb was meant to wound, to plant seeds of doubt. 3 years ago it might have. Tonight it merely confirmed that Eleanor had made the right choice. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Harrington," she said as the music ended. "And for the final confirmation that I've outgrown the small box you tried to keep me in. I wish you well." She turned away before he could respond, moving gracefully through the crowd to where Alex waited, watching the exchange with evident concern. "Everything all right?" he asked as she reached him. "Perfect," Eleanor replied with a genuine smile. "Just closing one chapter before beginning the next. Have you ever invested everything in a moment of courage? Share your story in the comments, because Eleanor's journey was just beginning, and the road that led her here was paved with strategic risks and quiet determination that would soon pay dividends she never imagined. As the gala began winding down, Alex turned to Eleanor with a thoughtful expression. "Would you like to get some fresh air? The garden terrace is usually quiet this time of night." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the suggestion. The emotional weight of the evening, the triumph, the confrontations, the surprising connection with Alex, had left her craving a moment of peace. The terrace was indeed deserted, the October night just cool enough to deter most guests from venturing outdoors. City lights sparkled below them like earthbound stars, while above, the real constellations struggled to compete with Manhattan's glow. "How are you feeling?" Alex asked as they stood at the stone balustrade. "Really feeling, beyond the perfectly composed exterior." The question caught Eleanor off guard. She was so accustomed to maintaining her professional mask that the invitation to genuine vulnerability felt almost dangerous. "Honestly," she said after a moment, "exhilarated, terrified, proud, a little in shock that after 3 years of planning, it actually worked." "It more than worked," Alex assured her. "You created a moment people will be talking about for years." "That wasn't the goal," Eleanor admitted. "The goal was simply to reclaim my power, to stop making myself smaller to fit into someone else's expectations." "A lesson many never learn," Alex said quietly. "Including me, for longer than I care to admit." Eleanor turned to him, curious. "You?" "Somehow I can't imagine Alexander Sinclair shrinking himself for anyone." He laughed, but there was a hint of old pain in it. "My journey to self-determination wasn't as elegant as yours. Mine involved a public failure, a nervous breakdown, and 6 months in a cabin in Montana questioning everything about my life." "The famous disappearance," Eleanor said, remembering the business headlines from 5 years ago when the tech wunderkind had vanished at the height of his success, only to reemerge half a year later with a completely different approach to business and life. "Not my finest moment," Alex admitted, "but necessary. I was becoming someone I despised, chasing metrics and market share at the expense of everything that actually mattered. And now I build things that will outlast me. Sustainable communities, ethical investment models, technology that serves humanity rather than exploiting it." He smiled self-deprecatingly. "At least that's the goal. The execution is always messier than the vision." "Isn't it always?" Eleanor agreed. They fell into comfortable silence, the city humming below them. After a moment, Alex spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Tell me about the dress. Not just its cost, its story. What made you choose this particular statement?" Eleanor appreciated the question. Most people had fixated on the price tag, missing the deeper significance. "When I first decided to leave Harrington Global, I knew it had to be on my terms. Not slinking away quietly, but making a declaration that couldn't be ignored or diminished." She ran her hand lightly over the exquisite fabric of the gown. "I wanted something that represented the value I'd built from nothing, despite being underestimated at every turn." "And Elena Voss?" Alex prompted. "How did she become involved?" Eleanor smiled at the memory. "I'd done some investment research on emerging designers and discovered that Elena was looking for financial backing to expand her atelier. We met for what was supposed to be a business discussion, but it evolved into something more personal. She recognized a kindred spirit," Alex guessed. "Yes, she'd built her brand from nothing, faced the same dismissal from the fashion establishment that I experienced in finance. When I told her what I was planning, she insisted on designing the gown herself, said it would be a statement piece for both of us." "She was right," Alex said. "It's magnificent. It's also the single most terrifying financial decision I've ever made," Eleanor admitted with a small laugh. Liquidating a significant portion of my portfolio for a dress goes against every investment principle I believe in. Some investments yield returns that can't be measured in market value, Alex observed. That's exactly what my mother said when I called her in a moment of doubt last week. Eleanor's expression softened at the memory. She told me that investing in my own power would pay dividends for the rest of my life. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She is. She raised me alone after my father decided his career was more important than his family. Went back to school, got her PhD in mathematics, taught me that your worth isn't determined by how others value you, but by how you value yourself. Alex nodded thoughtfully. My mother died when I was young. My father did his best, but he was a traditional man who believed business was no place for sentiment. It took me years to unlearn that lesson. The shared confidence created another layer of connection between them. Eleanor found herself increasingly drawn to Alex's combination of strength and vulnerability, his evident success tempered by hard-won wisdom. So, she said, steering the conversation back to safer ground, you mentioned dinner next week? I did, Alex confirmed. Though I should warn you, I tend to eat at places where the menus have prices and the waiters don't use French accents. Eleanor laughed, genuinely delighted by his lack of pretension. That sounds perfect. I've had enough performance dining to last a lifetime. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Vivian appearing at the terrace doorway. There you are. The valet line is getting crazy. We should probably head out if you don't want to be standing in the cold for an hour. Eleanor nodded, though she felt a reluctance to end the evening that surprised her. You're right. We should go. I have my car and driver here, Alex offered. I'd be happy to give you both a ride home. That would be wonderful. Eleanor accepted before Vivian could respond. As they made their way back through the now thinning crowd, Eleanor was acutely aware of Maxwell watching from across the room. His expression a mixture of anger and disbelief as she left the gala with Alexander Sinclair, the investment he'd been pursuing for months. Outside, Alex's driver brought around a sleek black Tesla. As they settled into the luxurious interior, Vivian gave Eleanor a meaningful look that clearly said they would be having a detailed discussion later. They dropped Vivian off first at her Chelsea apartment, enduring her not-so-subtle winks and meaningful glances with good humor. When they were alone, a comfortable silence fell between Eleanor and Alex. "May I ask you something?" he said finally as they neared her Upper East Side address. "Of course. The investments you made to fund tonight, they represent years of work, don't they?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "Every bonus, every bit of overtime, invested carefully and grown over time. So you've essentially liquidated a significant portion of your financial security to make this statement," Alex said, his tone not judgmental but concerned. "What's your next step? Practically speaking." The question was direct but not condescending. He was engaging with her as a fellow strategist, not questioning her judgment. "I have enough runway for 6 months of operating expenses for Hayes Strategic Capital," Eleanor explained. "My business plan projects profitability within 9 months if I secure the client base I've been quietly cultivating. It's a calculated risk, but one I'm prepared for." Alex nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. "I'm not typically an angel investor for financial firms, but if you ever find yourself needing additional runway, I hope you'll consider me as an option. No strings, no control provisions, just straight capital investment in exchange for reasonable equity." Eleanor was momentarily taken aback by the offer. "That's very generous. But I should be clear. I'm not looking for a white knight, financially or otherwise. And I'm not offering to be one," Alex replied, his tone sincere. "I make investment decisions based on potential return. What you've demonstrated tonight, the strategic patience, the calculated risk-taking, the clear vision, those are qualities I look for in any venture I back." As the car pulled up to Eleanor's building, she found herself believing him. Unlike Maxwell's last-minute offer of recognition when it served his interests, Alex's respect had been evident from their first interaction. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll keep that in mind." "Good." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card, simple, elegant, with just his name and contact information. For whenever you're ready for that dinner, or to discuss potential synergies between our ventures, or both. Eleanor took the card, her fingers brushing his in a moment of connection that felt significant despite its brevity. I'll call you next week. I look forward to it. His smile was warm, genuine in a way that had become rare in her world of strategic networking and calculated appearances. As Eleanor entered her apartment that night, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. The triumph of her exit from Harrington Global was everything she'd hoped for, the reclamation of power, the public acknowledgement of her worth. But the unexpected connection with Alex Sinclair had introduced a variable she hadn't planned for. Setting her evening clutch on the entryway table, Eleanor moved to the window overlooking the city. 3 years of careful preparation had culminated in tonight's Declaration of Independence. The path forward was hers alone to define, her company, her vision, her terms. And yet, as she carefully removed the $3 million gown and hung it in her closet like a battle standard, Eleanor found herself thinking not of Maxwell's shocked face or the whispers that would follow her bold exit, but of Alex's quiet understanding and the possibility of a connection based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. Her phone chimed with a text from Vivian. Girl, call me first thing tomorrow. I need details. Also, I think half of Manhattan's financial elite is having a collective meltdown over your exit. You're officially a legend. Eleanor smiled, setting the phone aside. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and triumphs. For tonight, she would savor the victory that had been 3 years in the making. The weeks following the gala unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor's resignation had indeed caused the stir she'd anticipated. Perhaps even more. Former colleagues reached out with a mixture of congratulations and thinly veiled job inquiries. Industry publications requested interviews. Potential clients, intrigued by the woman who'd walked away from Harrington Global in spectacular fashion, sought meetings. Hayes' strategic capital took shape with remarkable speed. Eleanor secured a small but elegant office in Tribeca, hired a lean staff of carefully selected professionals who shared her vision for ethical investment, and began the meticulous work of building a firm that reflected her values rather than someone else's. Through it all, Alex Sinclair remained a steady presence. Their promised dinner had stretched to 3 hours of conversation that ranged from business philosophy to favorite books to childhood memories. A second dinner followed, then a Sunday afternoon walking through the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, then a private tour of his Harlem Renaissance project. Each encounter deepened Eleanor's appreciation for the man behind the billionaire reputation. Alex was brilliant but humble, successful but grounded, confident but willing to acknowledge his mistakes. Most remarkably, he engaged with her ambition as something to be celebrated rather than managed or contained. Your firm is growing faster than you projected, he observed one evening as they shared a quiet dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the village. The kind of unpretentious place that would never appear on Maxwell Harrington's radar. Word of mouth has been better than anticipated, Eleanor acknowledged. It turns out there's a significant market for investment guidance that prioritizes both profit and ethics. No surprise there, Alex said. The old paradigms are shifting. People want their money to work for them without compromising their values. Exactly, though I'm still encountering resistance in certain circles. The old guard doesn't quite know what to make of me. Alex smiled. They will. Success is the most persuasive argument in finance. Speaking of success, Eleanor said, I heard Harrington Global lost the Singapore deal. Alex took a sip of his wine, his expression carefully neutral. I decided their approach wasn't aligned with my long-term vision, and had nothing to do with their treatment of a certain former executive assistant? Eleanor teased gently. Let's just say their corporate culture raised concerns about their judgment in other areas. Alex replied diplomatically, though the glint in his eye told her there was more to the story. As coffee arrived, Alex's expression turned more serious. I have a business proposition for you. A legitimate one, he added quickly. No personal considerations involved. I'm listening, Eleanor said, intrigued. The Harlem Renaissance Project needs a financial partner who understands both the community development angle and the investment potential. Someone who can structure the funding in a way that balances social impact with sustainable returns. He leaned forward slightly. I'd like Hayes Strategic Capital to take on that role. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. That's $100 million project, Alex. We're a new firm with a limited track record. A new firm led by one of the sharpest financial minds I've encountered, he countered. I don't need a big-name partner with outdated methodologies. I need innovative thinking and ethical framework. The industry will say you're making this decision for personal reasons, Eleanor pointed out. Let them, Alex shrugged. I've never made business decisions based on what others might think. I care about results. Eleanor considered the proposal, weighing the opportunity against the potential complications. It would be a transformative project for her fledgling firm, establishing Hayes Strategic Capital as a serious player in ethical investment. But it would also inevitably fuel speculation about her relationship with Alex. Speculation that could undermine the professional reputation she was working so hard to build. I need to think about it, she said finally. Review the details. Consider the implications. Of course, Alex agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. The formal proposal is on its way to your office tomorrow. Review it with your team, and we can discuss any questions or concerns. His easy acceptance of her caution only increased Eleanor's respect for him. There was no pressure, no leveraging of their personal connection to influence her professional decision. Thank you, she said sincerely, for understanding the position I'm in. I do understand, Alex said, his expression thoughtful. You're establishing yourself on your own terms, and that's something I respect enormously. The last thing I want is to complicate that journey. There was a moment of charged silence between them, the unspoken acknowledgement of the growing personal connection they'd both been carefully navigating alongside their professional interactions. And if I were to decline the proposal? Eleanor asked, testing the boundaries. Would that affect other aspects of our relationship? Not in the slightest, Alex replied without hesitation. I value what's developing between us, Eleanor. That stands completely separate from any business considerations. His honesty was refreshing, so different from the transactional relationships that dominated their world, where personal connections were just another form of currency to be traded. As they left the restaurant later that evening, walking together through the quiet village streets, Eleanor found herself contemplating the unexpected turns her life had taken since the night of the gala. She'd launched her firm, reclaimed her professional identity, and found herself increasingly drawn to a man who seemed to truly see her, not as an assistant or an accessory or even as a conquest, but as an equal partner in every sense. Penny for your thoughts? Alex asked as they paused at a street corner. Eleanor smiled. Just reflecting on how different my life is now compared to 3 months ago. Regrets? He asked, studying her expression carefully. Not a single one, she replied with certainty. Though I'm still adjusting to making decisions solely for myself after years of facilitating someone else's vision. That adjustment takes time, Alex said with the wisdom of experience. When I restructured my companies after my sabbatical, I had to relearn how to trust my own judgment without the validation of market metrics or board approval. How did you do it? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. I created a personal mission statement, a set of principles that would guide every decision, regardless of external pressures or expectations. He smiled slightly. It sounds simple, maybe even a bit cliché, but having that North Star made all the difference when the path forward wasn't clear. They reached Eleanor's building, pausing at the entrance. The moment felt weighted with possibility, the natural conclusion to an evening of deepening connection. I should go, Eleanor said, though her reluctance was evident. Early meeting tomorrow. Of course. Alex made no move to press for more than she was ready to give. I'll have the proposal delivered by 10. I'll review it thoroughly, she promised. There was a moment of hesitation, then Alex leaned forward and gently kissed her cheek, a gesture that managed to be both respectful and charged with unspoken potential. Good night, Eleanor, he said softly. Good night, Alex. As she watched him walk away, Eleanor touched her cheek where his lips had been. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, She was allowing herself to consider the possibility of a connection that enhanced rather than diminished her power. A partnership rather than a compromise. Tag a sister who showed strength when others underestimated her. Because Eleanor's journey was about to take another unexpected turn. As the past she thought she'd left behind refused to stay quietly buried, the proposal from Sinclair Developments arrived as promised the next morning. A comprehensive document detailing the Harlem Renaissance Project and the proposed partnership with Hayes Strategic Capital. Eleanor spent the day reviewing it with her small but formidable team, impressed by both the vision and the financial structuring. "This is legitimate," observed Diane Chen, Eleanor's chief investment strategist and former Wharton classmate who had leapt at the chance to join Hayes Strategic Capital. "The numbers work, the community impact metrics are solid, and the projected returns are reasonable without being exploitative. I'm not seeing red flags. Except for the obvious one," noted Marcus Washington, their legal counsel. "The personal relationship between you and Sinclair." Eleanor appreciated their candor. It was exactly why she'd hired them. "Which is precisely why we need to be absolutely certain this partnership can stand on its own merits, completely independent of any personal considerations. From a pure business perspective, it's an opportunity we'd be foolish to pass up," Diane pointed out. "It establishes us immediately as a serious player in ethical investment and opens doors to similar projects. The press will have a field day either way," Marcus added pragmatically. "If we take it, they'll claim favoritism. If we don't, they'll speculate about trouble in paradise." Eleanor sighed, all too aware of the double standard she faced. "So we make our decision based on the merits, document our due diligence exhaustively, and prepare for the inevitable scrutiny." After hours of analysis and debate, the conclusion was unanimous. The Harlem Renaissance Project aligned perfectly with Hayes Strategic Capital's mission and would be a sound cornerstone investment for the firm. The fact that it came from Alex Sinclair was ultimately irrelevant to its value as an opportunity. Eleanor called Alex that evening with their decision. "We're in," she told him, "with the understanding that this partnership will be handled with complete transparency and professionalism on both sides." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Alex assured her. "My legal team will coordinate with Marcus on the final documentation." With that settled, their relationship continued to develop on parallel tracks. Professional collaboration on the Harlem project alongside a deepening personal connection that moved gradually from friendship to something more intimate. Alex respected Eleanor's boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, never using their business partnership as leverage for personal advancement. 3 months after the gala, Hayes Strategic Capital was thriving beyond Eleanor's most optimistic projections. The firm had secured a stable of clients drawn to their ethical investment approach. The Harlem Renaissance Project was proceeding on schedule, and Eleanor found herself featured in Forbes as Finance's New Conscience, a profile that focused on her vision and expertise rather than her dramatic exit from Harrington Global. Life was good, which was why Eleanor should have expected complications. The first hint of trouble came in the form of a seemingly innocuous email from a financial blogger requesting comment on the allegations regarding your time at Harrington Global. Eleanor nearly dismissed it as phishing, until similar inquiries began arriving from more mainstream outlets. "Maxwell is behind this," Vivian declared over emergency cocktails at Eleanor's apartment that evening. "He's been stewing for months, watching your success while his star fades. He's finally making his move." "But what allegations?" Eleanor asked, genuinely puzzled. "I was meticulous about documentation, proper use of company resources, all of it. There's nothing to find." "Since when has the truth mattered in character assassination?" Vivian replied grimly. "He doesn't need proof, just innuendo. Sources close to Harrington Global question Hayes' methods. Former colleagues raise concerns about proprietary information. It's all about planting seeds of doubt." Eleanor's phone rang. Alex. She hesitated before answering, uncertain whether to involve him in this emerging crisis. "Hey," she said finally, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Have you seen it?" he asked without preamble, his tone concerned. "Seen what?" "The Wall Street Journal article. It just posted online." Eleanor quickly pulled up the Wall Street Journal website on her tablet. Vivian reading over her shoulder. The headline made her stomach drop. Rising star or corporate spy? Questions surround Hayes' strategic capital founder. The article itself was a masterpiece of innuendo and careful wording, never making direct accusations but raising questions about how Eleanor had built her investment portfolio while working at Harrington Global, suggesting potential misuse of proprietary information and client relationships. Maxwell was quoted expressing disappointment and concern about his former assistant's ethics. "This is libel," Vivian fumed. "It's carefully crafted to skirt the edge of libel," Eleanor corrected, her analytical mind already dissecting the strategy behind the attack. Just enough specific details to seem credible, just enough qualifying language to avoid legal consequences. "Eleanor, I'm coming over," Alex said firmly. "We need to get ahead of this." "No," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Not tonight. I need to think, to review my records and prepare a response. Having you here would just fuel the narrative that I'm using personal connections to advance professionally." There was a brief silence on the line. "You're right," Alex conceded. "But I'm here if you need anything. Legal resources, PR support, whatever helps." "Thank you," Eleanor said, genuinely grateful for his understanding. "I'll call you tomorrow when I've had time to strategize." After hanging up, Eleanor turned to Vivian. "I need to pull all my investment records, every email, every time log from the last 3 years. This isn't going away with a simple denial." They worked through the night, assembling documentation that proved Eleanor had meticulously separated her personal investments from her work at Harrington Global. By morning, she had a comprehensive response ready. But the damage was already spreading. Several smaller clients had sent concerned emails, and a major potential investor had postponed their scheduled meeting. "We need to go on the offensive," Marcus advised during an early emergency meeting at the office. "Release all the documentation, demand a retraction, possibly file our own lawsuit." That's exactly what Maxwell wants, Eleanor realized, seeing the strategy with sudden clarity. A public fight that keeps this story in the news cycle, regardless of whether the allegations are proven false. The doubt alone is enough to damage us. "So what's the alternative?" Diane asked. "We can't just ignore it." Eleanor considered the question carefully. Throughout her career, she had observed how power operated in their world, not just through direct confrontation but through strategic positioning. Maxwell wanted a David and Goliath narrative, with himself as the established institution being attacked by an unscrupulous upstart. "We changed the conversation entirely," she said finally. "We don't engage with the allegations directly, that just gives them more oxygen. Instead, we accelerate the announcement of our Community Impact Fund." The team looked at her with confusion. "The fund we've been developing for next quarter?" Marcus clarified. "Yes, we move it up to this week. Full press rollout, community partners present. Focus entirely on the future we're building, rather than responding to baseless allegations from the past." "That's actually brilliant," Diane said, catching on. "It positions us as focused on positive impact while making Maxwell look petty and backward-looking." "Exactly," Eleanor nodded. "And we invite key financial reporters for exclusive interviews about the fund, giving them something more interesting to cover than recycled innuendo." They spent the day executing the pivot, calling community partners, preparing press materials, and scheduling a major announcement for Thursday. Eleanor deliberately kept Alex at arm's length during this process, not because she didn't value his input, but because she needed to demonstrate that she could weather the storm on her own terms. When she finally called him that evening, his relief was palpable. "I've been worried about you," he admitted. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," Eleanor replied truthfully. "We have a plan and it feels right, but I wanted to give you a heads up. We're accelerating the announcement of our Community Impact Fund, which will naturally mention our partnership on the Harlem project." "Good," Alex said without hesitation. "Use whatever helps counter this narrative. My team is at your disposal." "Thank you, but I think it's important that I handle this independently," Eleanor explained. "The more separation between us right now, the better, at least publicly. There was a brief silence before Alex spoke again. "You're right, but I need you to know that I'm not backing away from our partnership, professional or personal, because of this attack. That would be letting Maxwell win." His unwavering support touched Eleanor deeply. "I know, and I'm not asking you to back away. Just to let me fight this battle on my ground, not his." "Understood. But Eleanor," his voice softened, "don't forget that true strength sometimes means accepting help when it's offered from the right place." The wisdom in his words resonated with her. For so long, Eleanor had equated independence with isolation, seeing any form of support as a potential compromise of her autonomy. But perhaps there was a difference between the controlling help offered by men like Maxwell and the genuine partnership Alex was offering. "I'll remember that," she promised. "And Alex, thank you for understanding." Thursday's press conference was a masterclass in strategic redirection. Eleanor stood confidently before the assembled media, community leaders from Harlem flanking her, as she announced Hayes Strategic Capital's new $10 million community impact fund designed to support small business development in underserved neighborhoods. "We believe that ethical investment isn't just about avoiding harm," she told the gathered reporters. "It's about actively creating positive change. This fund represents our commitment to building financial infrastructure that serves communities traditionally overlooked by mainstream institutions." When the inevitable questions about the Wall Street Journal allegations arose, Eleanor was prepared. "I understand why you're asking," she said calmly, "but I've provided comprehensive documentation disproving those claims to the relevant outlets. Today isn't about responding to baseless allegations from my past. It's about the future we're building, a future where finance serves humanity rather than the other way around." The strategy worked better than even Eleanor had anticipated. By week's end, the narrative had shifted dramatically. Business publications were covering the innovative structure of the Impact Fund, community leaders were praising Hayes Strategic Capital's approach to ethical investment, and several new clients had reached out, drawn by the firm's clear vision and values. Maxwell attempted to reignite the controversy with additional revelations, but each had less impact than the last. Without Eleanor engaging directly, his attacks increasingly appeared as what they were: the bitter efforts of a man watching his former assistant eclipse him. 6 months after the gala that had changed everything, Hayes Strategic Capital was firmly established as a rising star in ethical finance. The Harlem Renaissance Project was breaking ground to considerable acclaim, and Eleanor found herself increasingly comfortable in her new identity, not as someone's assistant or accessory, but as a force in her own right. Her relationship with Alex had deepened as well, finding its own rhythm separate from their professional collaboration. They were careful to maintain appropriate boundaries around their business partnership, but in private, they were building something Eleanor had never quite believed possible: a connection based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection that enhanced rather than diminished her independence. 1 year to the day after Eleanor's dramatic resignation, Hayes Strategic Capital hosted a reception celebrating the firm's successful first year. The guest list included clients, partners, community leaders, and financial press, a deliberate statement about the networks Eleanor had built on her own terms. Alex arrived fashionably late, having texted earlier about a meeting that was running long. Eleanor greeted him warmly but professionally, mindful of the industry eyes watching their interaction. "Congratulations," he said, his eyes conveying much more than the simple word. "What you've built here in just 1 year is remarkable." "Thank you," Eleanor replied. "It wouldn't have been possible without partners who shared our vision." The formal exchange satisfied the observers around them, allowing them to move into more genuine conversation as the evening progressed. Eleanor introduced Alex to several community partners from their newest initiative, while he connected her with potential investors interested in ethical development projects. As the reception wound down, Eleanor found herself on the small balcony of the event space, taking a moment of quiet reflection amid the success swirling around her. The New York skyline glittered before her, the same view she'd contemplated for years from behind Maxwell's shadow, now hers to admire on her own terms. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Alex's voice came from behind her as he joined her on the balcony. Eleanor smiled. "Just appreciating the journey." 1 year ago today, I was preparing to walk down that staircase in a $3 million dress with no certainty about what would happen next. And now? Alex asked, standing beside her to gaze at the city lights. Now I know what I'm capable of, Eleanor said simply. What I've built, what I've overcome, what I still want to create. It's extraordinary, Eleanor, Alex said softly. You're extraordinary. She turned to look at him, struck once again by how different he was from the men she'd known before. Men who had always seemed threatened by her ambition rather than inspired by it. I have something for you, Alex said, reaching into his jacket pocket. A 1-year anniversary gift of sorts. Eleanor expected a small jewelry box or perhaps a token keepsake. Instead, Alex handed her a folded document. Curious, she opened it and felt her breath catch. This is, she began, scanning the contents with growing disbelief. The deed to the Elena Voss gown, Alex confirmed. I tracked it down through my sister's fashion connections after you mentioned that you'd had to sell it to fund your second quarter expansion. Eleanor had indeed reluctantly parted with the iconic dress 4 months earlier, selling it to a private collector to fund a time-sensitive opportunity for Hayes Strategic Capital. The practical decision had been financially sound but emotionally difficult. The gown had been both symbol and catalyst of her transformation. Alex, I don't know what to say, Eleanor managed, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. How did you even find it? That part wasn't difficult, he admitted. There aren't many Elena Voss originals of that caliber changing hands. The negotiation was another matter. The collector was reluctant to part with it. I can't accept this, Eleanor said, though her hands tightened on the document. It's too much. It's not a gift in the traditional sense, Alex explained. It's a restoration of something that belongs to you, something that represents a pivotal moment in your journey. The dress is now in secure storage at Elena's atelier, where she's personally overseeing its care until you're ready to claim it. The thoughtfulness of the gesture, not just the return of the dress but the understanding of what it represented, touched Eleanor deeply. In that moment, she realized how profoundly Alex understood her, not just as a business partner or romantic interest, but as a person with a complex inner landscape of values, ambitions, and symbolic touchstones. Thank you, she said simply, words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Alex's expression grew more serious. There's something else I want to say, Eleanor. Something I've been considering for some time. The intensity in his voice made her pulse quicken. What is it? This past year has shown me what's possible when two people genuinely respect and support each other's ambitions rather than competing or compromising. He took her hand gently. I've never experienced a connection like ours. One that enhances rather than diminishes who we are individually. Eleanor felt a momentary flutter of panic, wondering if this was leading to a premature proposition that might disrupt the careful balance they'd established. But Alex, perceptive as always, continued, I'm not proposing marriage, Eleanor. Not tonight. That's a conversation for when we're both ready, if we ever are. What I am proposing is a conscious decision to continue building this relationship with the same intentionality and respect that has brought us this far. The relief and appreciation Eleanor felt was profound. Alex understood that for a woman who had spent years reclaiming her autonomy, even the most loving traditional gestures could feel constraining if they came too soon or with unspoken expectations. I would like that very much, she replied, squeezing his hand. To build something meaningful on our own terms and timeline. Alex smiled, the genuine warmth in his eyes reflecting the city lights. That's all I ask. As they stood together on the balcony, the skyline of possibilities stretched before them. Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from invisible assistant to respected founder, from making herself small to claiming her rightful space, from accepting crumbs of recognition to demanding the full feast of respect she deserved. If Eleanor's journey of self-empowerment touched your heart, please like and subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories of remarkable women who found their voice. 1 year later, on a perfect autumn evening reminiscent of that fateful gala night, Eleanor Hayes stood before a full-length mirror in the private dressing suite of Elena Voss's exclusive atelier. The famous $3 million gown had been carefully preserved, its constellation of diamonds and emeralds catching the light just as magnificently as they had 2 years earlier. "It still fits perfectly," Elena observed with satisfaction, making a minor adjustment to the flowing train. "Though you wear it differently now." "How so?" Eleanor asked, studying her reflection. "The first time it was armor," the designer explained. "Now it's simply a beautiful gown on a woman who no longer needs external validation of her power." Eleanor smiled, recognizing the truth in Elena's observation. So much had changed in 2 years. Hayes Strategic Capital had grown from a bold idea to a respected firm managing over $500 million in ethical investments. The Harlem Renaissance Project was thriving, with its first phase already welcoming residents and small businesses. Most importantly, Eleanor herself had evolved, from a woman determined to prove her worth to one who simply lived it, every day. "Are you ready?" Elena asked, checking the time. "Your guests will be arriving." Tonight was another milestone, the formal launch of the Eleanor Hayes Foundation, dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. The foundation represented Eleanor's commitment to creating pathways for others who, like her younger self, had brilliance and determination but lacked access to the networks of power. "I'm ready," Eleanor confirmed, gathering the train of the gown with practiced ease. As she made her way to the private dining room of the exclusive restaurant she'd chosen for the intimate gathering, Eleanor reflected on how differently she moved through the world now. No longer invisible, no longer diminishing herself to fit others' expectations. She had claimed her space and discovered it was exactly where she belonged. The room was arranged precisely as she'd requested, elegant but not ostentatious, with thoughtful touches that reflected her personal style rather than conventional luxury. Around 30 guests were expected, a deliberately small group of supporters, partners, and beneficiaries of the Foundation's first grant cycle. Maxwell Harrington was not among them. After his failed attempt to discredit her, he had eventually extended an olive branch, a carefully worded email suggesting they move past unfortunate misunderstandings for the good of the industry. Eleanor had responded with professional courtesy but maintained her distance. Some bridges were better left uncrossed. As the first guests began to arrive, Eleanor greeted them with genuine warmth. Among the early arrivals were 3 young women from the Foundation's mentorship program, brilliant entrepreneurs who reminded Eleanor of herself a decade earlier, but who would hopefully not face the same battles for recognition. "Ms. Hayes," said Zora Williams, founder of an innovative fintech startup focused on financial literacy in underserved communities. "I can't thank you enough for the Foundation's support. It's changed everything for us." "The thanks goes both ways," Eleanor replied sincerely. "Your work is exactly what we need in this industry. Fresh perspectives that challenge outdated systems." As more guests filtered in, Eleanor felt a familiar presence behind her. Turning, she found Alex watching her with undisguised admiration. "You're wearing the dress," he said softly, taking in the full effect of the famous gown in its second public appearance. "It felt appropriate," Eleanor replied, "coming full circle in a way." "It's perfect," Alex agreed, though nowhere near as remarkable as the woman wearing it. After 2 years together, his genuine appreciation still warmed her. Their relationship had deepened gradually, each step taken with intentional care rather than conventional expectations. They had built something rare in their world, a partnership of equals that enhanced rather than compromised either's independence. As the evening progressed, Eleanor moved among her guests, connecting people with shared interests, highlighting the work of the Foundation's first beneficiaries, and outlining her vision for the future. When the time came for her formal remarks, the room quieted with respectful attention. 2 years ago, Eleanor began, I made a decision that many considered dramatic, perhaps even foolish. I invested everything I had built in a single moment of courage, walking away from security toward an uncertain future. She paused, remembering the mixture of terror and exhilaration she'd felt descending those stairs at the Waldorf. What I discovered in that leap is that our greatest limitation is often our willingness to accept others' definition of our worth. We wait for permission, for validation, for someone to recognize what we already know about ourselves. Her gaze swept the room, connecting with the young entrepreneurs who were hanging on her every word. This foundation exists to support women who are ready to define their own worth, to provide not just financial backing, but the networks and mentorship that can transform potential into reality. Because when we invest in ourselves with the same fierce commitment we've given to others, everything changes. The applause that followed was heartfelt. As Eleanor stepped back from the small podium, Alex moved forward with unexpected purpose. The room quieted again, curious about this unplanned addition to the program. "I hope you'll forgive me for this small hijacking of your event," he said with a warm smile toward Eleanor. "But some moments are too perfect to pass up." Eleanor felt a flutter of surprised anticipation as Alex turned to face her directly. "Eleanor Hayes," he began, his voice steady but intimate, as if they were the only two people in the room despite the attentive audience. "2 years ago, you walked into a ballroom and changed not just your own life, but the lives of countless others, including mine. You showed me what true courage looks like, what integrity means in action, and how transformative real partnership can be when built on mutual respect." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Eleanor's breath caught as he opened it to reveal not a traditional diamond ring, but an exquisite emerald, the exact shade of the stones in her gown, set in a simple platinum band. "I'm not asking you to change your name, your identity, or your independence," Alex continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm asking if you'll consider building a formal partnership to match the one we've already created in our hearts. A union that enhances rather than diminishes who we are individually." The proposal was so perfectly Alex, thoughtful, respectful of her autonomy, and timed to coincide with her moment of professional triumph rather than overshadowing it. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected emotion welling up in response to his careful understanding of exactly who she was and what she valued. "Yes," she said simply, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will." As Alex slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect complement to her gown rather than a replacement for it, the room erupted in delighted applause. Vivian was the first to reach them, embracing Eleanor with tears in her eyes. From resignation letter to foundation launch to engagement, all in the same dress, she whispered. "That's what I call return on investment." Eleanor laughed, the joy of the moment washing over her. As she looked around at the gathered witnesses to this new chapter, colleagues who respected her mind, mentor who would build on her example, friends who had supported her journey, and now Alex, who loved her strength rather than despite it, she felt a profound sense of completion. Her journey from invisible assistant to powerful force in her own right had not been easy. It had required courage, strategic patience, and the willingness to invest in herself when no one else would. But standing here now, wrapped in the same $3 million declaration she'd worn to claim her independence, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty. 5 years after that fateful gala night, Eleanor Hayes Sinclair cradled her newborn daughter in her arms, the tiny bundle with wisps of dark hair and curious eyes representing yet another transformation in her journey. "Sophia Patricia Hayes Sinclair," she whispered, testing the name they'd chosen to honor both their mothers. Alex sat beside them on the hospital bed, his expression one of wonder and deep pride. "She has your determination already," he observed softly. Eleanor smiled, exhausted but radiant. Throughout her pregnancy, she'd approached motherhood with the same strategic thinking that had built her firm, reorganizing Hayes Strategic Capital's leadership to allow for a genuine maternity leave, personally mentoring Zora Williams to serve as interim CEO. Looking down at her daughter, Eleanor felt a sense of completion unlike any professional triumph. From invisible assistant to powerful founder, from independent woman to wife, and now mother, each transition had come on her terms, each identity adding to rather than replacing what came before. "I never expected this kind of joy," she admitted. "For so long, I thought choosing professional fulfillment meant sacrificing personal happiness." "You never had to choose," Alex reminded her gently. "You just needed to find people who didn't ask you to." Of all the investments Eleanor had made throughout her remarkable journey, this one, this tiny, perfect person who would forge her own path in a world her mother had helped make better, would yield returns beyond anything she could imagine. What part of Eleanor's journey resonated most deeply with you? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for the next empowering story.